Thank you, Sandeep, for joining me today. My name is Cameron Ackberry, and I'm here as the moderator of this discussion. The purpose of this discussion is to help our viewers understand how Everest ERP is a true ERP application built for a modern era. Let's start with introductions. I've asked you this before. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you came up with the idea to start Everest.
Yep. So I'm Sandeep Chopra. I'm one of the founders of Everest, based out of our office here in Mountain View. Everest was incubated back in 2020. And my prior experiences before Everest were at a company called Viva Systems, which was pioneering the idea of the industry cloud. So deep industry specific applications in that particular case for the life sciences industry. And prior to that, I worked for a partner of SAP and learned the ERP ecosystem that way. Started my career in consulting in kind of 1.0 services. So try to bring all those experiences from services, customer success, application infrastructure to industry applications to Everest.
Well, thank you for that. You are an expert in the industry. So let's start with what makes Everest Systems a true ERP and not just a financial system or point solution with AI features?
I think one of the things that's being talked about a lot now with the wave of AI ERP is a lot of features to help automate bits and pieces of your business process. So an example of that would be flux analysis as part of the monthly closed. It could be generating an accrual entry based on some historical expenses that you've had. There's dozens and dozens of use cases like this, and I think they all have some merit. But these are use cases that, frankly, Everest or anyone else can all innovate upon to make life 1%, 2%, 5% better. But that is not the transformational impact of AI ultimately on ERP. I think what's great about ERP is it's a big canvas, not just to automate business processes, but to also be able to build and develop new functionality for your business. Because no matter what a good software vendor develops for you, they're not going to be able to predict how your business is going to change between now and the 10 years from now that you need to use this system. And so we really focused at Everest on the pillars, not just of business process automation, but of how do we take the AI technology to make business users and developers more powerful in the context of what they're able to accomplish within the ERP.
In their own organization.
In their own organizations.
So you briefly talked about AI. AI is the foundation of Everest. How is Everest designed differently by being an AI native from day one? And why does that matter to enterprise finance leaders today?
Why it matters to leaders today is because I think companies want to be able to move faster, and especially in this environment today with unpredictability globally in countries than ever before. People want to be able to enter new geographies. They want to be able to change their product and pricing mix. They want to be able to integrate acquired companies faster.
Yeah.
All of that puts pressure on your ERP to essentially build faster.
Yeah.
Right? And if your ERP is not able to be agile for both your business users and your technology people that are enabling those business users, then you're going to be doing all that innovation outside the system.
Yeah.
That's fine. You'll get the job done. But then you're going to have to find a way to duct tape all of that innovation outside the system back again into your financials.
To create a Frankenstein-like application.
Yep.
Yeah. So speaking of bringing everything into one application, what core business functions does Everest unify under one system? And how does that reduce silos or manual work for the office of the CFO?
Well, we are, as I mentioned, from the start of our company, we've really looked at industries to say, well, what moves the needle for this industry? How could an integrated system make the people that use our product more strategic in how they operate their business, right? So we started with the software SaaS industry. So what makes the SaaS software industry really fun and unique is the pace of product innovation. Yeah. It used to take, I think, when I started my career 20 years ago, product release cycles used to be 3 years. Yeah. And they became months. Now with AI, they're becoming weeks. And so when you are innovating that fast and launching new products, it's sure as hell it's great to have a system that can innovate with you to be able to price those products, package them, determine if they're profitable or not. And so how does that translate down to specific application decisions? Well, you've got to really get nailed order to cash, right? That's product, pricing, billing, revenue. It should not be divorced from your financials. Right. It should be together so that you can figure out the impact of those changes. And what are the biggest costs of these companies? It's labor cost, people cost, and around the world with developers now in many countries and people using PEOs very heavily post-COVID, and cloud costs. So that's what we try to master, is not just core accounting and financials. Of course, we have to do that. but how those core accounting and financials tie to processes in order to cash and in cloud and people costs.
Thank you. That's very interesting how it all comes under, and it all conforms with ASC 606
Absolutely.
and not IRS 15. So when you talk about adaptability and innovation, why can't legacy cloud ERPs adapt fast enough to today's subscription, usage-based, and multi-entity-based business models?
If you look at just like a list of features that every vendor has, you can see a list of features that looks kind of the same everywhere, right? But the reality is when these systems were built, they were all built for companies that were software companies or the companies that were manufacturing companies that were still delivering the goods physically on USB drives, on CD-ROMs, right? Or just frankly shipping it to a customer.
Yeah.
So when you have all those assumptions built into the core application architecture that you have, it's very hard for you to say now, 25 years later, let me go drop all of that and do something that's entirely different. Whereas whether you're a software company or frankly an e-commerce company or a modern manufacturing company, you have to think about changing your product and your pricing mix pretty fast these days, which means you have to think like a software company, which means your business processes need to run like a software company.
That's right. That's right. So we're talking about speed, right? We're talking about getting the ability to change processes. How does Everest eliminate the traditional trade-off between customization and speed of implementation?
I think as long as I've been around business software, the amount of time that goes together in integrations and customization far exceeds the time in just configuring the system. So I think there's some unique product investments that we've made. One, we've actually built an integration platform inside of Everest. So we directly connect to your key applications. In fact, in most cases, we include those integrations as part of our overall offering. So it's instead of you integrating and customizing, you're configuring those applications, those integration applications to bring data in from applications like Salesforce and HubSpot and Stripe and so on. I think that's one. The second part is we've built technology inside of Everest called live sandboxing. And it allows you to be able to, within a sandbox environment, inside production, simulate any customization, any integration change. So you have the ability to know what's going to go wrong before you make that change, test it, fix it. And that means your ability to go from, like having the requirements to then the design and then ultimately implementation and go live just became a lot faster.
Where did you come up with the idea that organizations would want a sandbox environment? We are the only application out there that has a sandbox environment. Where did you come up with that?
Well, I've got to give my credit to my co-founder here in Germany who came up with it, Franz. But really, I think we knew from the start of the company that the big problem we wanted to go after was how do you make change management and customization easy? Because you look at the dollars and the time spent, it's still today 60, 70, 80% on services, support, customization, integration than it is on actually the software side. Even today, in 25 years into SaaS, we're still that way today in ERP. And so we thought the biggest change that we could make was to actually somehow come up with a way to be able to model change inside the system itself. We thought, well, people do all this work. They think of a new change. They push it in like a development tenant. They call that a sandbox. Then they push it to test, another sandbox. Then they push it to UAT, yet another. Then they finally push it to production. And by the time they push it to production, they already want to make another change to the change they made in the first place. And they do this all over again. So we thought to ourselves, well, if we could just do this in one place, and the modern technology surely allows for it in the cloud, then we'd be able to skip a bunch of these steps, but still get the same rigor of following these specific change steps so you don't break something in the production system.
Wow. Okay. Great. So let's move over to helping CFOs shift from backward-looking reporting to real-time forward-looking. In what ways is Everest helping these CFOs?
Yeah, so I think, if you look at traditional systems, ERP, like what people will tell you is, it's really good at recording my business, right? But where do you go if your business is an overtime business, a subscription business, a consumption business, where the real value actually isn't just in what's happened, it's what you might be able to do. Well, you do that on spreadsheets. You do that sometimes in FP&A tools. And so what we thought to ourselves is if we design a system where any change can be modeled, not after the fact, but before it happens, you'd be able to do anything in the ERP in a what if kind of way.
Right.
So examples of that would include, hey, I'm signing up this big contract with this huge customer that's going to enable us to make our quarterly number, but I'm going to have to give a really big discount. Is that trade-off worth it? Now, that decision can only come in ultimately from the CEO, the CFO, the CRO. Those people almost never log into any of these systems. Our tools are allowing executives to log into these systems, not just to get reporting data, but to actually help run the business.
Yeah.
The same thing applies on headcount. You can simulate your hiring and your headcount to see how that's going to change your cost and affect your gross margin as a company at the product level.
Yeah.
All that you can do inside the system because of the way we do change management.
That's fantastic. So is it also possible then to push data back up into, say, a Salesforce and create dashboards in Salesforce to help revenue leaders?
So the great thing about the way we do change management is, it's like, let me give an example. Like, let's just say your ERP is a really fancy spreadsheet, but it's got all this really complicated formulas and it's got all these changes that you're tracking. And ultimately, the changes from that spreadsheet have to be managed because you cannot screw up that amazing master spreadsheet of yours. And it's going to get pushed back to other systems too. And that's sort of what we do here. We, in the very ERP way, so it's a lot more complicated than the spreadsheet, we manage all the changes that you're going to make, including the changes that you're going to push back into Salesforce. So, for example, ARM or rep in Salesforce with whether the payment's been made or not, if the invoice is late, if they should be communicating with the customer to ping them back, trying to upsell them. All that information ultimately resides in your ERP. We're able to simulate it, publish it safely in our system, and publish it safely back to the original systems where it came from.
And I doubt there's another ERP out there that can do something like that. What role does automation play in Everest, and what are example processes that are now fully automated end to end?
The hardest, so we run to complexity over here, meaning we go after the hard problems that we think move an industry forward. And if you look at what are the hard problems in SaaS, I think one of the hardest problems is the problem that every SaaS company is taught in sales, which is land and expand.
Right.
Well, what does that really mean at the finance level? That means contract modifications. That means early renewals, upsells, discounts, hopefully not a lot of downsells, but changes to your contracts to ultimately be able to guide the customer to higher revenue over time while managing your costs. That process, however, requires you to have your product management of your product catalog, your billing, your revenue, and your GL all in one place. You cannot solve it if it's not in one place. That's the kind of process that we're able to solve for, especially when tied together with cloud costs in one system.
Unbelievable. I don't think there is another application out there that can do it. I remember I had worked in a previous life for a competitor, and back then in 2006, they asked me to help scope it out, and it was all columns of months, and it was rows of company names, and at the end, you would get your journal entry down here, and it was a very simplistic view, but now things are a lot different today. Let's talk about compliance, auditability, and internal controls. How does Everest support these in complex environments like SaaS or global consolidation?
So I'll go back to my spreadsheet or my Google Docs example for earlier, right? Imagine everything in your system, every change you made to a document has been tracked.
Right.
But at ERP scale, that means every change to every configuration, every policy, every piece of code, every data element, sales orders, journal entries, obviously, hirings, recruitments, everything is versioned in our system. And because everything is versioned, we know exactly what changed at what point in time. And once you have that entirely permeating through your system, you're then able to use that as foundation to be able to, of course, track changes, publish the right changes, and then demonstrate proof that the right changes were made to support an audit. And again, those changes apply to business data as well as code and release management.
Auditors are going to love coming into Everest, going to make their lives easier. So let's talk about built for scale. What does built for scale actually mean in Everest architecture and business model, and how does that benefit growing companies?
So, I love this question because I think, the word scale, a lot of times you talk to technologists, you'll get a different answer than you talk to like a business person. I think both are important. I think there's one part of scale is, can you technically scale to millions of transactions? Right. And I think certainly, we've built a system in the cloud era native to today's technology from the ground up that scales to high volume transactions. But I think there's another part of scale that in some ways is even more complicated than technical scale. which is, can you scale to business processes?
Right.
And I think what's sometimes poorly understood is a business with only thousands of transactions can somehow be way more complex than a business with billions of transactions. One may be a purely transactional business where you're just recording payments received.
Right.
Whereas in the other business, you may have thousands of contracts, but each of them has a lot of one-off considerations, complex discounting, complex revenue considerations, impacts compliance and audit in much harder ways, and requires much more sophisticated features or product functionality to accommodate the business. We've tried to do both. Have an architecture that scales to high volume transactions, but also really built for scale that allows companies to become multi-product companies, multinational companies, companies that are able to acquire new companies faster so they can become a larger global company with ease.
All with a sandbox and AI built into it.
Absolutely.
So it's very much multidimensional here. I'm going to ask you a tough question.
Okay.
In one sentence, I want you to answer in one sentence. If you had to summarize why Everest is the future of ERP, what would that sentence be?
Okay. All right. I would say, the Everest is built for change. The world isn't predictable, but we can make it so for you with Everest.
That's great. You actually did it. You actually did it in one sentence.
That's a tough one. Okay.
Fantastic. Last question here, and thank you again. Since we last spoke, 3 months ago, what have you learned about the industry?
Well, what's been great for me to see, I think just right here, now we've got many of our customers live, is how much we're able to get to customers that are willing to change the way they do their business relative to the legacy systems they had, right? Half of our customers now already are coming from replacements of NetSuite, of Intact, of legacy ERP systems, and the other half, predictably, are coming through upgrades of bookkeeping software.
Yeah.
Now, we did think that those replacements were going to be maybe a little harder to get, but that does tell you that the market's ready for something different.
Yeah, I agree with you with that. Well, thank you again, Sandeep, for joining me today. You are certainly an expert in the industry for founding Everest Systems. I want to thank you for helping our viewers understand how Everest ERP is a true ERP built for the modern era. I'd like to do this again with you.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you.